vous engage à condition que vous foutez à poil devant moi.
Il faut éviter, par exemple, j'emploie cette expression, d'allumer, puisque c'est l'expression d'un garçon.
Il y a toujours eu des femmes antiféministes et des hommes féministes.
Hello and welcome to a new edition. I'm Nadia Sharbi and this week we're putting the focus on feminism here in France. You join us on a Paris bridge named after Simone de Beauvoir. The post-war philosopher is the author of The Second Sex, a landmark book that inspired so-called second wave feminism and the women's lib movement. Well, 69 years on, in the wake of Me Too and its French offshoot Balance ton porc, or Squeal on your pig, a new wave of feminism has emerged here in France. But before we take a look at this renewed interest in women's rights, let's take a look back at how feminism has evolved.
1970, the year that France's modern feminist movement was born. Through the founding of certain groups like the MLF, women began staging mass protests, opposing traditional gender roles and coining a new term.
We started using the word sexism to refer to the way men deliberately insult women, saying things like "my old lady" or "she's a bitch" like all women, hysterical like all women. There's no excuse for it.
The feminist movement was not embraced by all of French society, its critics claiming it was anti-men.
People always say that MLF is anti-men. It's not true. We're just pro-women. Nearly half of women live with men anyway, so that claim is baseless.
The movement later gained momentum to include protests against sexual violence and rape, which in the 1970s were not yet punishable crimes. In this foul footage, men are asked why they think women are raped.
Because they want it. Women can consent to being raped.
Technically, rape doesn't exist.
In 1976, one trial made national headlines. A man who'd picked up a female hitchhiker and raped her saw his sentence reduced on appeal.
Men are what they are. One must avoid tempting them, if I can use that expression, and then backtracking by changing one's mind.
Rape trials galvanized women's rights protesters, often bringing them to the courthouse steps.
We want rapists to be tried in criminal courts, and we want to publicise their cases. We believe that it's one thing for a man to be a rapist, but it's another for his neighbours and co-workers to know about it, for it to be in the paper. Bad publicity can be a deterrent.
Halimi succeeded in bringing 3 rapists to trial for the rape of 2 Belgian tourists. In a landmark 1978 ruling, the men were sentenced to between 4 and 6 years in prison. This set the stage for a crucial change to French law in 1980, when rape became a punishable crime. Fast forward to the 90s, when the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace took centre stage.
He said, "I'll only hire you if you get naked in front of me." I refused several times, and he said, "You should have done it."
One time I was looking through a filing cabinet, and when I turned around, he'd unzipped his trousers. I was very angry.
Behaviour that was finally punishable by law in 1992, when sexual harassment became a criminal offence. Legislation that laid the foundations for initiatives in the years to come to promote equality both in the workplace and in public life.
Now, one of the political responses to the Me Too movement takes aim at that oh-so-common disturbance, street harassment. Spearheaded by France's Minister of Gender Equality, a portfolio revamped by President Macron, the new legislation makes catcalling and sexist insults and offence punishable with on-the-spot fines. But the measure has been met with scepticism, not least because it's proved difficult to apply.
Marie Laguerre made headlines around the world when she challenged sexual harassment only to be physically assaulted. But hidden from CCTV view, some 86% of French women have experienced sexual harassment in a public space.
It's the whistling, the name-calling, when they shout, "nice piece of ass."
When they call you like a dog.
Being followed in the metro, in the street, close to home.
So what do France's new on-the-spot fines change? On September 25th, the first fine of €300 was handed to a man who made obscene comments about a woman on a bus. He also received a jail term for hitting both her and the driver. Verbal abuse and physical assault already carry prison sentences under French law. What's newly punishable are sexist gestures, noises and behaviour. For France's VG police union, the new law only complicates the existing legal framework, and a change of mindsets among those responsible for identifying and condemning the harassment should be the priority.
It won't change much. Some officers will just hesitate between the two articles. To be able to apply the law properly, the first step is for all those within the police force who sexually harass or discriminate against their colleagues to be punished by our administration.
The government has promised training on sexism for officers involved, but police say no course has been programmed so far. In 2017, Fatima Ben-Omar was harassed in central Paris in view of 3 policemen who laughed before siding with the man.
It took place right before their eyes and they didn't help. So imagine when a woman comes to them to tell them a man's been hassling them. They aren't taking the issue at all seriously yet.
Ben-Omar regularly supports women reporting sexual harassment and assault and says she often witnesses sexist and dismissive treatment of victims at the hands of police. She believes the lack of specific training for those dishing out the fines can have risky consequences.
For the police, men sitting outside a cafe and whistling at women isn't such a big deal. So when a woman comes and says, "A man's just been harassing me," they say they don't see anything. And as they aren't going to accompany each woman home, they leave her to face the person she's just accused. So it's all the more humiliating and dangerous.
The government's unveiled a site aiming to put victims in contact with relevant authorities and resources. However, some women aren't waiting around for official help, creating apps like Hands Away, which allow users to warn and support one another.
Well, here, as elsewhere, fighting for equal rights is a daily struggle. And this being France, the battle is even being fought in our plates and cocktail glasses. Aptly named Combat, or Battle, this Paris bar is held by 3 vocal feminists who've taken it upon themselves to balance out the gender mix in the male-dominated world of mixology. And I'm here to meet with our guest, gender researcher and historian Florence Rochefort, who's just published a book called A Global History of Feminisms. Hello, thank you very much for being with us, Florence. In the title of the book, you use the word feminism in the plural, and certainly here in France, there are very many different currents as far as feminism is concerned. In just broad strokes, what are the main ones, would you say?
Presently, there are 2 main currents. The first is universalist, which was spearheaded by the great existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, who famously said, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." And at the other end of the spectrum is the differentialist or gender-specific current, which aims to re-establish the notion of womanhood from the perspective of biology, the experience of being in a woman's body, and then to review relations between men and women, to challenge women's status. And Americans coined that second differentialist current as French feminism, but in fact it's just one school of French feminism.
And how much has France influenced feminism on a global scale?
Even within France, French feminism is not as well known as, say, English feminism and the suffragettes. And yet feminisms have always been transnational and influenced each other. For instance, Simone de Beauvoir, who I quoted a little earlier, was hugely influential. Her book, The Second Sex, which was published in 1949, had a huge impact in the United States, for instance, and was translated all over the world. So yes, that universalist strand of French feminism is significant.
So that was 1949. Today, would you say that France is a sexist, macho society?
In certain ways, yes. France's elite, French culture, is often ill-disposed to feminist ideas. But having said that, there are some important gains. For instance, in the workplace, the fact that more than 80% of women are able to work, including those with young children. Even if the childcare offer is far from perfect, compared to other European nations, France is largely favorable to women. at least as far as work is concerned. And in fact, there is an institutional or state feminism of sorts that has outlasted the whims of successive left and right-wing leaderships. It has its limits, but it's effective nonetheless.
And how far has France come regarding equal representation in positions of power, whether it's politics, as you just mentioned, or the media or business?
Certainly, women's access to the highest levels of power, whether in the field of politics, business, or culture, is a major and far-reaching issue. In fact, there's currently a campaign for more women to head the country's theaters. As for politics, for a long time, France was bottom of the class in Europe, as a result of the parity legislation adopted in 2000, which doesn't force parties, but at least encourages them to put more women on the ballot. We're now at about a third of women on the electoral roll, and that number keeps rising. But many parties still prefer to pay hefty fines rather than put women up for election.
And until very recently, feminism was seen as a dirty word here in France. Do you think the Me Too movement has maybe roused and empowered a new generation of women?
The
overtones of that word have always gone back and forth, from suggesting hope to being viewed as more subversive and worrying. It really varies. So yes, Me Too has brought feminism back to the forefront, but that doesn't mean the fight is over. The struggles continue, even if the word's overtones change. And even before Me Too, feminism was staging a comeback, thanks to the so-called pop feminism.
And are men involved in this sort of new wave of feminism in France?
Feminist men have always existed. They're rare, but fortunately there are some great men in the international history of feminisms. And let's not forget there are also a lot of anti-feminist women. But I do think that most men were very shocked by the magnitude of the Me Too revelations, by women's public accounts of their experience. And many men expressed solidarity, though not the anti-feminists, obviously. Now the challenge is to change men's behavior.
And that's a harder battle to win?
Yes.
Florence Rochefort, thank you very much for having spoken to us.
Thank you.
That's where we're leaving this edition. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to France 24.
Gonna shake you, gonna break it.